Welcome to the Synthesis of Yoga, the book that changed my life. We are going through the Synthesis of Yoga of Sri Aurobindo, reading line by line. For those who are new, we have reached the 7th chapter of part 1. And this book is the essential reading for anyone who is interested in yoga and yogic traditions of India, and the very essence of these hundreds of various schools of yoga available in India. Sri Aurobindo distills them and gives us the integral yoga, yoga that embraces life, yoga that is transformative, yoga that is evolutionary. Very act of reading puts us in touch with Sri Aurobindo's consciousness, and the very act of reading is sadhana in itself. It's one of the most transformative thing to do because it reformats your brain and gives illumination to your mind. In our last episode, which was 96, Sri Aurobindo gave us insights into how the moral, ethical ideals are limited because the mind is limited in its nature. It cannot know the complexity. Besides, when it is pushed, the ethical ideals are pushed to the limits. Between them, there is conflict. For example, love and justice often come in conflict. So there is always a value conflict within the limited conceptions of the mind. So when mind tries to create mind-based rules to contain life overrides them. It creates compromises. And there is always impracticality of idealism on one side and the practical, impulsive, instinctive nature that drives people, societies. As a result, the mental ideal tends to fail, even when it is able to shed light on a beautiful vision ahead, but it remains as a potentiality. Let's read further. Where does this evolution takes? So we have already covered 3 levels of ethics, standards of conduct. So this chapter we are reading is called the Standards of Conduct and Spiritual Freedom. And the standards of conduct, Sri Aurobindo gave 4 different levels. First one was individualism, individual needs and desires driven by instincts. Second is collectivity, that imposes itself on the individual, again driven by instincts and the conflict between them. And the third is when the mind develops individual assent to mental consciousness and bring in the light of reason to govern and control the impulses, transform them, transmute them. That's when the third law comes into the picture. Yet that moral and ethical principle brought in by the mind fails to realize in life. Now what? Where do we go from here? So our reading starts from paragraph 22. The link is there in the description. Kindly follow the text. The fact is that when we have reached the cult of absolute ethical qualities and erected the categorical imperative of an ideal law, we have not come to the end of our search to touch the truth that delivers. So, even when we have reached a point of absolute mental ideals, it is still not the end of the search. The truth that delivers, the truth that will bring the harmony between individual and the collective life. The fact is that when we have reached the cult of absolute ethical qualities, and erected the categorical imperative of an ideal law. Categorical imperative of an ideal law. This is very common to the human mind, to be very categorical and make its ideal law imperative. Erected the categorical imperative of an ideal law, we have not come to the end of our search or touch the truth that delivers. There is no doubt something here that helps us to rise beyond limitation by the physical and vital man in us. So the mental ideals help us definitely to rise beyond the vital instincts, the basic instincts of our biological life, which is pretty much like an animal. Our rational intelligence, ethical principles, ideals, they help us to rise beyond this instinctive nature. There is no doubt something here that helps us to rise beyond limitation by the physical and vital man in us. An insistence that overpasses the individual and collective needs and desires of humanity, still bound to the living mud of matter, in which it took its roots, an aspiration that helps to develop the mental and moral being in us. This new sublimating element has been, therefore, an acquisition of great importance. Its workings have marked a considerable step forward in the difficult evolution of terrestrial nature. Terrestrial nature, our whole earth nature. It is within that we have emerged as a product of evolution. In that journey, we have inheritance of our animal past. Upon that foundation is built the mental life. Then the mental man emerges with intellectual capacity, cultural life, intellectuality, aesthetic sense, and its refinement and development. This is an enormously important step in our evolutionary ascension. This is really an ascension from vital animal to truly a human being. So there is no doubt something here that helps us to rise beyond the limitation by the physical and vital man in us, an insistence that overpasses the individual and collective needs. So the insistence by the rational intelligence and its ideals and principles that overpasses the individual and collective needs and desires of humanity. A humanity that is still bound to the living mud of matter in which it took its roots. An aspiration that helps to develop the mental and moral being in us. So the evolutionary emergence of the mental and moral being in the human being is a huge and very, very important step in the evolution of life on earth. So an aspiration that helps to develop the mental and moral being in us. This new sublimating element, it sublimates our animal instinctive life. It makes it more sublime, refined. This new sublimating element has been, therefore, an acquisition of great importance. So this mental capacity, mental, moral development is a great acquisition. Its workings have marked a considerable step forward in the difficult evolution of terrestrial nature. So on earth there is evolution undergoing. Out of all the species, nature created human beings. It is within human beings the mental consciousness, rational intelligence found its expression, which no other creature possesses to the degree that human being possesses. We have extended, we have grown in it. Within that is our morals, ideals, all that has emerged. And this is of a great importance, a great acquisition in the terrestrial evolution. Earth's evolution, we are the representative species in which mind and rational intelligence and its light found its birthing, growth. Through that, ideals, morality, all that emerged within this light. And behind the inadequacy of these ethical conceptions, something too is concealed that does attach to a supreme truth. There is here the glimmer of a light and power that are part of a yet unrealized divine nature. So if we look at the the pattern of Sri Aurobindo's thought, he is showing what are the strengths and weaknesses of each one. What is the essential truth, where there is distortion, where there is limitation. So there is, on one hand, there is an individual man with individualistic drive, personal needs and drives, that when it is instinctively driving him, then nature introduces the next level, the collectivity that binds him, that tames the wild animal in the individual. Then there is a tension between the individual and the collective. And within both, there is something of absolutely essential value, because the individual brings the progressive element into the collectivity, and the collectivity stabilizes the individual's excessive tendencies and the larger collective realizations. Then when the mind emerges with mental principles and values emerges, even when it fails, even if it's not able to really realize the ideals it conceives, yet there is something in it that is of utmost importance. So behind the inadequacy of this ethical conception, something too is concealed that does attach to a supreme truth. There is a connection with the supreme truth in the mind and its ideals. There is here the glimmer of a light and power that are part of a yet unreached divine nature. In the evolutionary process, we have not yet reached the divine nature. Yet, there is a glimmer of the divine nature faintly reflected in the human's aspiration for an ideal. This is of immense value. So behind the inadequacy of this ethical conception, something too is concealed that does attach to a supreme truth. There is here the glimmer of a light and power that are part of a yet unrealized divine nature. But the mental idea of these things is not that light, and the moral formulation of them is not that power. So even then there is a glimmer here in the mental nature, it is not the original light. And it is not the original power that finds its expression as morality. It is not the original light that finds its expression as ethics. Mind is only a glimmer, a reflected light. It doesn't have the original light. So the mental idea of these things is not that light. That light is the original spiritual light above. And the moral formulation of them is not that power, the power of the spirit, higher consciousness. These are only representative constructions of the mind that cannot embody the divine spirit, which they vainly endeavor to imprison in their categorical formulas. So this is what mind does. It tried to capture and imprison into its formulas the divine spirit. And these attempt to capture only can have representative constructions. Just like our deities that we worship, these are all representative constructions to something that is beyond this material world. But the mental idea of these things is not that light, and the moral formula of them is not that power. These are only representative constructions of the mind that cannot embody the divine spirit. This is something Sri Aurobindo repeats, the mind that cannot embody the divine spirit. Mind in its current evolutionary stage, it's so narrow, so limited, it cannot embody the divine light, which they vainly endeavor to imprison in their categorical formulas. What mind does is to reduce it into its mental formulas. Beyond the mental and moral being in us is a greater divine being that is spiritual and supramental. So there is this being in us that is not mental. We are currently the mental beings. But beyond us there is the spiritual and supramental levels which we need to discover. For it is only through a large spiritual plane where the mind's formulas dissolve in a large spiritual plane, where mind's formulas dissolve in a white flame of direct inner experience. White flame of direct inner experience. It's a profound imagery, a white flame. White light represents light of the Divine Mother. So the white flame is her light, illumined from within, rising within the heart of human being. As a flame of aspiration, the white flame of direct inner experience. Until we come in touch with that white flame of inner experience, mental constructs will remain. These mental constructs and formulas will dissolve only when we touch the inner experience of the white flame. Soul's self-luminous existence and its self-existent ananda and delight and knowledge and power. In a white flame of direct experience we can reach beyond mind and pass from its constructions to the vastness and freedom of the supramental realities. So on one hand, the formulas of the mind dissolves when we experience the white flame within, and then it will lift us up towards the great planes above, vastness and freedom of the supramental realities. That has to be discovered. When that discovery happens, that is where we have our true salvation, true liberation, true transformation, and an action that is driven by divine consciousness, an action that is in this material physical world. So that's the possibility that lies beyond the mind. Mind is only a representative construction, a representative vague light. This limited constructs and formulas dissolve the moment we enter into experience. And experience, he is presenting it as a white flame of direct inner experience. And we can reach beyond the mind. So beyond the mental and moral being in us is a greater divine being that is spiritual and supramental. For it is only through a large spiritual plane where the mind's formulas dissolve in a white flame of inner experience that we can reach beyond mind and pass from its constructions to the vastness and freedom of the supramental realities. There alone can we touch the harmony of the divine powers. Harmony of the divine powers. Divine powers are not in conflict. They work in harmony. Whereas our human faculties work in conflict, fighting with each other, confronting each other, dragging each other down, distracting. That's the human nature. Whereas the divine powers, there is a harmony of the divine powers. So there alone, there here means the supramental high ranges of consciousness. There alone, the unification of, there alone can we touch the harmony of the divine powers that are poorly misrepresented to our mind or framed into a false figure by the conflicting, wavering elements of the moral law. So this harmony of the higher divine powers gets misrepresented in our conflicting, wavering elements of moral law. The mind, in its reflected light, there is always this conflicting, wavering elements of the moral law. But that is not the case in the higher supramental consciousness. There is a harmony of the divine powers. There alone, the unification of the transformed vital physical and illumined mental man becomes possible in that supramental spirit, which is at once the secret source and goal of our mind and life and body. The discovery of the supermind remains as the core theme of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy. And the purpose of yoga itself, because that alone can bring in that the necessary transformation. That is, there alone, the unification of the transformed vital and physical. So we are vital physical beings. There is a transformation of the vital and physical, and illumined mental man. So the illumined mental man and the vital man, they get unified only when supramental consciousness is arrived at. So alone, the unification of the transformed vital and physical and the illumined mental man becomes possible in that supramental light, supramental spirit, which is at once the secret source and goal of our mind, life, and body. This whole evolution happening here on earth, the very source of it is supermind. Supermind projects itself into time and space. In that process, it creates mind, life, and body. And so it is the source. And then there is an evolution from below, the formation of the body within the material body, the life energy within that, there is a mind. And this evolutionary process has its goal as supermind. It is the source as well as the goal of evolution. So there alone, the unification of the transformed vital and physical and the illumined mental man becomes possible in that supramental spirit, which is at once the secret source and goal of our mind and life and body. There alone is there any possibility of an absolute justice, love, and right. Remember, at a moral level, at an ethical level, at mental level, it is impossible. Whereas in the supramental level, there is a perfect possibility of an absolute justice, absolute love, absolute right. Far other than that which we can imagine, at one with each other in the light of a supreme divine knowledge. There's a supreme divine knowledge in which justice, love, right, everything become complementary. They are not in conflict. But that is far other than that which we imagine, what our mind can imagine. It is beyond the imagination of the human mind and its limited understanding. There alone can there be a reconciliation of the conflict between our elements. So it is in that supramental consciousness alone reconciliation is possible. And Aurobindo repeats this point again and again in every chapter. Everywhere it is the discovery of the psychic being and the ascension into the supermind. This alone is the key to end the suffering on earth and to establish divine life on earth and to end the conflict within us and around us and to establish life divine on earth. So there alone can there be a reconciliation of the conflict between our members. Our psychological members otherwise are in conflict. All of them get unified, transformed into their ultimate perfection in the supermind. In other words, there is above society's external law and man's moral law. These are the two laws that binds. One is society's external law. Social laws are external. Society has its established external law. Then there is an internal moral law that we follow. And beyond them, though feebly and ignorantly aimed at by something within them. So both society's external law and man's moral law, feebly, however limited it is trying to reach out something noble above. So beyond them, though feebly and ignorantly aimed at by something within them, a larger truth of a vast unbound consciousness. A larger truth of a vast unbound consciousness. Our individual consciousness is bound, limited, it's not vast at all. We identify with our body and its limitations. The moment you are this tiny little thing, and the universe is huge, infinitely large. That smallness is what our state of identification is. But when we break out of the mold into higher ranges, that's where we touch a larger truth of a vast, unbound consciousness. Consciousness that is infinitely wide. A law divine towards which both these blind and gross formulations are progressively faltering steps. Both these, that means the social law and the moral law of individual. They are progressive faltering steps towards a divine law. Even when these steps are blind and gross formulations, that try to escape from the natural law of the animal to a more exalted light of universal rule. So we have that pointers towards a greater light, and that try to escape from the natural law of the animal to a more exalted light of exalted light or universal rule. Exalted light or universal rule. A rule that is so universal, it is not belonging to any particular context. Principles that are eternal, timeless, which we can discover. So, in other words, there is above society's external law and man's moral law, and beyond them, though feebly and ignorantly aimed at by something within them, a large truth of a vast, unbound consciousness, a law divine towards which both these blind and gross formulations are progressive, faltering steps that try to escape from the natural law of the animal to a more exalted light or universal rule. So our social laws and moral constructs are a remote reflection, which in a way helps us link us with the higher law towards which we can ascend. That divine standard, which the Godhead in us is our spirit, that divine standard, since the Godhead in us is our spirit, moving towards its own concealed perfection, must be the supreme spiritual law and truth of our nature. So that divine standard that is above, that larger truth of a vast and bound consciousness, since the Godhead in us is our spirit, moving towards its own concealed perfection. So in us, even though the Godhead dwells, it is concealed. Its perfection is concealed. So moving towards its own concealed perfection must be a supreme spiritual law and truth of our nature. So it's our own nature that we need to discover. Deepest nature, highest nature, from where this spiritual law can be rediscovered. It is there, we have to discover that. Must be a supreme spiritual law and truth of our nature. Again, we are embodied beings in the world with a common existence and nature, and yet individual souls capable of direct touch with the transcendent. This supreme truth of ourselves must have a double character. Again, as we are embodied beings in the world, we are embodied beings. Embodied. We have a material, physical body, but we are not this body. We are something else beyond the body. But we are here as embodied beings with a common existence and nature, and yet individual souls capable of direct touch with the transcendent. So we are individuals capable of a direct touch with the transcendent truth that is beyond all these tiny little molds in which we find ourselves to be. individual souls we are, regardless of the fact that we belong to a collectivity. Within the collectivity, we are still the individual who is potentially capable of coming in touch with the transcendent. And the supreme truth of ourselves must have a double character. So this truth is there within us, and it has, or it must have, a double character. So what are this double character to this power within us? It must be a law and truth that discovers the perfect movement, harmony, rhythm. It must be a law and truth that discovers the perfect movement, harmony, and rhythm of a spiritualized collective life and determines perfectly our relations with each being and all beings in nature's varied oneness. That's the very first character. It must be a law and truth that discovers the perfect movement and harmony and rhythm. We are individually and collectively movements. These movements must be in harmony and rhythmic of a great spiritualized collective life and determines perfectly our relations with each being and other beings in nature's varied oneness. In nature, we human beings are one type of creatures. There are endless variety of other creatures. So arriving at a harmony, a perfect relationship of the individual with the collective and this collective with the rest of the life of the ecosystem, vaster nature, and there is a varied oneness. There is an underlying oneness, but it's of infinite variation. So it must be a law and truth that discovers the perfect movement, harmony, and rhythm. So the new law that we are to discover, one of its characteristic nature is that it must help us to discover the perfect movement, harmony, and rhythm of what? Of a great spiritualized collective life, and determines perfectly our relations with each being and all beings in nature's varied oneness. It must be at the same time a law and truth that discovers to us at each moment the rhythm and exact steps of the direct expression of the divine in the soul, mind, life, body of the individual creature. So there is a simultaneous discovery. One is of the alignment with the collective being. Other is the alignment with the divinity in us. It must be at the same time a law and truth that discovers to us at each moment the rhythm and exact steps of the direct expression of the divine in the soul, mind, life, and body of the individual creature. We are individual creatures. When we discover that higher law, it will have this double character. One is that it helps us to discover the movement, harmony, rhythm of a great spiritualized collectivity, collective life. And within that, determines perfectly our relations with each being and other beings in nature in varied oneness. That's one characteristic. Other is, same time, it is a law and truth that discovers to us at each moment the rhythm and exact steps of direct expression of the divine. We are instruments of the divine, and this higher law will enable us to know that become the rhythm and exact steps of the direct expression of the divine. And this happens in the soul, in the mind, life, body of the individual creature. Our entire instrumental nature must be capable, and will be opening to that divine force and its expression. So this new code of conduct that we are looking at, that is derived from the true divine light, must be giving us these two. One is a perfect alignment with the collective, other is perfect alignment with the divine, so that everything is in harmonious rhythmic expression of the divine movement. And we find in experience that this supreme light and force of action in its highest expression is at once an imperative law and an absolute freedom. Law and freedom are opposites in our human experience and the way we experience in our everyday life context. Laws bind us, freedom breaks the laws. Whereas in this higher experience of divine consciousness, we find in experience that the supreme light and force of action, it is light and force of action. It is something that enables us to act in the world. This supreme light and force of action in its highest expression, the supramental expression, is at once an imperative law and an absolute freedom. So it is perfectly capable of bringing together imperative law, a law that cannot be violated, a law that is absolutely perfect, a law that is unavoidable, an imperative law, at the same time an absolute freedom. Freedom and law goes together in this higher consciousness. It is an imperative law because it governs by immutable truth our every inner and outer movement. So there is a truth, capital T here, immutable truth. It's not relative truth, it's an absolute immutable truth. So this law governs by the immutable truth, and it's not a mental construct, but a direct light and force of the spirit. It is an imperative law because it governs by immutable truth our every inner and outer movement. So that truth and its light governs every inner and outer movement. And yet each moment and in each movement, the absolute freedom of the Supreme handles the perfect plasticity of our conscious and liberated nature. So yet at each moment and in each movement, the absolute freedom of the spirit handles the perfect plasticity. On one hand, it is an absolute law, and yet there is perfect plasticity of our conscious and liberated nature. That is truly the moksha, absolute freedom. But it is the freedom of the spirit, not the freedom that is acquired in immobile trance in the formless world, but here in the material nature where life is unfolding. It is in this space Supermind gives us the absolute law. With it brings the plasticity, a perfect plasticity, and the liberated nature's absolute freedom. So, and yet at each moment and each movement, the absolute freedom of the Supreme handles the perfect plasticity of our consciousness and liberated nature. So it is towards that our evolution is heading. This is something that is yet to be realized on earth. Where we are is the mental construct, mental principles, mental ideals, ethics. But these are again pale reflections of a supreme light and power above. And it is discoverable. And once we discover it, it will have this double character. It brings together the collective harmony and individuals' perfect alignment with the divine will and its expression through the individual. And that's the key to the life divine on earth, and it's the key to integral yoga. So with that, we come to the end of this episode. It's a short one. I would love to hear from you, your feedback, your suggestions. So some of the episodes are longer, some are shorter. Let me know, what would you prefer? How would I structure the future sessions? Thank you. See you next week.